Hey sixth graders, we're going to continue reading The Chocolate Touch. Alright, so in this video I'm going to read chapters 6 through 8, so finish 8, and then after each chapter you can answer your questions. Alright, so let's start on chapter 6 on page 42. When the others had been excused to go out for the mid-morning play, John had to go stand by Miss Plimsoll's desk. "John," Miss Plimsoll said, "you mustn't make up silly stories to excuse your failures." "It must have been the truth. What did you do with your pencil?" "This is it," John said, showing Miss Plimsoll the pointed stick of chocolate. "Really it is. It's changed." "What do you mean it's changed?" Miss Plimsoll demanded. "That's my pencil," John tried to explain, "only it isn't the same anymore. Nothing stays the same. Today, if I put it into my mouth, the same thing happened when I chewed my gloves. They were chocolate too." John said, Miss Plimsoll slowly, "Do you feel all right?" "Yes, thank you," John said. "I feel all right, except," he added, "I'm getting so thirsty." The water from the water fountain turned to chocolate, and so did the water upstairs. "I would like to drink cold water." "Yes, John," Miss Plimsoll said. She suddenly looked pale. "You run out and play with the others. I'm going to have to talk with the nurse." "And John," Miss Plimsoll said as he started toward the classroom door, "here's another pencil. Be a good boy and try not to lose it. I'm afraid I'll have to keep his piece of chocolate until school's out. You know we don't allow anyone to eat candy in class." Miss Plimsoll put the slightly chewed chocolate pencil in her desk drawer, and John went out to look for Susan. He found her skipping rope with two girls in his class. John usually scorned skipping rope. He preferred hide and seek, tag, FBI, and spies, kick the can, or any other good, exciting game. Jumping up and down in one place just to avoid being hit by a rope seemed silly to him. But he was sorry for having spoiled Susan's silver dollar, and he was willing to make a sacrifice. "Susan," he said. Susan continued to bounce on one foot as her two friends swung the rope over and under and over and under, over and under her. She didn't seem to notice John. "I'll skip with you," he offered. Susan stopped and the rope was caught by her shins. "Let's try doubles, backward," she said, but not to John. She ignored John. "You go first, Betty. Ellen, you go second. I'll go last. The one who does it the most times gets the first slice of birthday cake." Susan looked at John, raised her eyebrows, shut her eyes, and stuck out the tip of her pink tongue. Then she turned back to the girls and smiled. Ellen whispered in Betty's ear, and Betty whispered in Susan's ear. Then all three of them looked at John and each other again and burst out laughing. "Oh, Susan," John protested, "I didn't mean to do it. The trouble is there's something magic about me today. Everything I put in my mouth turns to chocolate." The girls giggled. "You wouldn't like it," said John, who was beginning to feel sorrier for himself than he had ever felt before. "I think it's getting worse," he added reproachfully. "At first, just the part in my mouth turned the chocolate. But when I nibbled the end of my pencil, the whole pencil changed." "Pooh," Susan said. The others hooted with glee. "Maybe I'll get sick and die," John warned. "Maybe I'll turn to chocolate myself. Then you'll be sorry." "I don't believe one word about the chocolate," Susan said. "And if it was true, you'd be glad, because all of you ever like chocolate eating is chocolate." "If you don't believe me," John retorted, "just you give me that skipping rope and I'll prove it." The girls looked questioningly at each other for an instant, but as they hesitated, the bell rang and it was time to go back to class. The rest of the morning passed slowly for John. He was afraid that his mother was going to cross about the missing gloves. She might not accept the excuse that he had eaten them. He regretted his messed up arithmetic test. He was sad about Susan's anger and disbelief, and he was getting terribly thirsty. Once during geography and once during art, he was excused to get a drink of water. Both times, however, he swallowed nothing but sweet chocolate. His mouth was getting stickier and sweeter and drier by the minute. All right, so that's the it of chapter 6. So how about you guys answer the questions, pause the video, and then I will continue reading chapter 7, so you can start back up after the questions. All right, so chapter 7 starts on page 48. "All right, boys and girls," Miss Plimsoll said, "it's almost time for lunch. Clear up your things, paint pots securely closed, brushes washed, paintings unpinned and laid out to dry, drawing boards stacked against the wall. There's the bell. Front row first. Timothy leading, then Robin in single file go. John alone walked slowly in the throng, hurrying along the corridors to the school cafeteria. The school was proud of the cafeteria and the food served in it. The room was spacious and bright, with windows all the way along one side overlooking the playground and the playing fields behind. The opposite side was wholly taken up by the shiny silver service counter. Several boys and girls were already settled at tables by the time John took his place in the line. Enviously, John noticed a boy at the nearby table stuck at straws dipped in milk bottle that was dull with frost. John couldn't imagine the refreshing taste of cold, creamy milk. At another table, a group of girls were eating fat, red cherries. John could almost feel the firm fruit on his tongue and the pleasure of biting through the tart, juicy pulp. The cherries must taste good. They must be thirst-quenching. John unhappily took a tray from the pile and slid it along the rails in front of the top of the counter. He put a paper napkin, a glass, and a gleaming spoon and knife and fork on the tray. It seemed hardly worth the while, but he felt that he might as well try the food and drink. Perhaps if I eat a different way without letting anything touch my lips, he muttered. My lunch won't all change to chocolate. He was not very hopeful. What? Asked the boy standing next to him. Nothing, John said. I thought I heard you say something about chocolate, the boy said. I hope this is the day for chocolate cream pie, he added. That'd be super. Oh, chocolate cream pie. Days of the past. John had been known to skip the main course so that they might spend all his lunch money on dessert. The thought of 4 pieces of chocolate pie now suddenly made his stomach feel as though he were on a roller coaster, an uneasy, flibberty-gibberty sensation. John shuddered. Ooky, he commented, wrinkling up his nose. The other boy shrugged his shoulders and started to choose his meal. John took a plate of cold chicken and ham, potato chips, and a crisp, moist lettuce and tomato salad. The white of the chicken, the pink of the ham, the gold of the potatoes, the pale green of the lettuce, and the red of the tomato looked delicious. He also took a half pint of milk, a thick-crusted whole wheat roll, and a cool pat of butter, a tumbler of water with ice cubes clinching against the glass, and a dish of fresh fruit, slices of orange and grapefruit and banana and grapes. John's tray was loaded with just the sort of meal his mother was always trying to persuade him to eat. Until today, John had always thought it was pretty dull to eat sensible things. When there were sweeter food and drink to be had, today, however, the sensible things looked most appetizing and his mouth began to water in his new sticky way. John paid for lunch with the money his mother had given him, went to the empty table and sat down. His fingers trembling slightly with eagerness, he cut a slice of lettuce. His fork went through the leaves with a promising crunch. He stuck the prongs of fork in a mouth-sized piece of lettuce and carefully inserted it into his mouth. The lettuce didn't touch his wide-stretched lips. John's teeth took together in a crisp layer of sweet chocolate. He took a small piece of potato chip, tilted back his head until he was looking straight up at the ceiling, and dropped the morsel straight down into his throat. He felt it go down, a sharp fragment of sweet chocolate. He tried the milk, the ice water, the fruit. Every solid and liquid then he sampled was transformed as soon as it entered his mouth. Then he became aware of a shocking novelty that he hadn't noticed at breakfast. At the rim of each glass there was a small semicircle of opaque brown. The bowl of his spoon and the prongs of his fork had become brown. As John watched, horrified, the areas of magic chocolate slowly spread until at last the glasses and cutlery were all solid chocolate. The trouble was unquestionably growing worse. John's scalp tightened with fear. What am I going to do? He asked himself miserably. Oh dear, what is going to happen to me? Leaving his tray of chocolate food and drink and utensils, John stumbled away from the cafeteria and out to the playground. All right, so that's end of chapter 7. So answer the questions, go back in the video if you need help or anything, and then I will continue reading chapter 8. All right, so chapter 8 starts on page 54. English class passed without incident. Miss Plimsoll distributed word lists for her pupils to take home. The more words you know, she exclaimed, as always, the more exactly you can think. There were some difficult new words, John noticed, avarice, indigestion, acidity, unhealthiness, moderation, digestibility. As Miss Plumsoil explained the meaning of each one, it seemed to John as though they had all had a special bearing on the present uncomfortable condition. At last, the bell rang. "Very well, class," Miss Plumsoil said. "Time for outside activities. Good afternoon." "Good afternoon, Miss Plumsoil." Miss Plumsoil gave the signal for dismissal, and the pupils in the front row filled out, followed by those in the second row, including John and Susan. Susan played a violin in the school orchestra, and usually she and John went to the rehearsals in the auditorium together. This time Susan hurried on ahead of him. John followed very slowly. The members of the orchestra were sitting on their music stands on the auditorium stage when John, carrying his dark blue trumpet case, got to his chair in the brass section. Mrs. Quaver had already begun to explain a difficult passage to the girl who played the flute. Just after Jay sings, "Nestling, chirp, and flee," she was saying, "You come in with your thrill, doodle, oodle, 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 ooh. You see the place on the score." "Good. Ah, John," Miss Quaver exclaimed, seeing him in his place. "I'm glad you're not absent. As I've just told the others this afternoon, we're having the first joint rehearsal of my arrangement of A Boy's Song by James Hogg. We've been over all the individual parts and all the sections, you will recall. Now it's time to fit the pieces together." John nervously opened his trumpet case and took his shining gold trumpet from his bed of scarlet velvet. The beautiful new instrument gave him confidence. He worked the valves nimbly with his fingers and looked up to Miss Quaver again. "Now, John," she said, "tell me when your little solo begins." Right after the end of the second verse, John promptly replied. He had practiced his part every evening in the basement at home for the last 2 weeks. He knew every note perfectly. After the line, "That's the way for Billy and me." "Good," Mrs. Quaver said, "and you don't forget what I told you, John. This is a happy song. I want you to play ta-da, ta-ta, 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 ta, simply repeating the rhythm of the voice. And I want you to be light and lively. This is supposed to be the song of a boy who loves romping in the country. Ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta," John thought. That shouldn't be too difficult, even with the whole orchestra listening to him. He had played it over and over at home, but he would have to try extra hard here. This was to be the first solo. Everyone else was depending on him to play it properly. "Right," said Mrs. Quaver brightly. With her baton, she rapped twice sharply on the music stand before her. All the musicians brought their instruments in playing position. Susan poised her bow over the strings of her violin. John held his trumpet close to his mouth and wiggled his fingers on the valves. Mrs. Quaver's baton moved from side to side, up and then down. The cymbals clashed and the drums thumped. The pianist brought his fingers down on the ivory keys of the piano. The violinist and the cellist made their weeing, the whumping sounds. All were in perfect unison. The rehearsal had begun. After the introduction, one of the older boys began to sing. "Where the pools are bright and deep, where the gray trout lies asleep, up the river and over the lea, that's the way for Billy and me." After the last line of the first verse, John's fellow trumpeter echoed the rhythm of the singer's voice. "Ta-ta, ta-ta, 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 ta-ta." Mrs. Quaver smiled approvingly at the successful performance, and with her baton gave the singer a signal to begin the second verse. "Where the blackbird sings in the latest, an oboe went peep. Where the hawthorn blooms in the sweetest, where the nestlings chirp and flee, the flute warbled according to plan. That's the way for Billy and me." John swallowed with an effort and put the mouthpiece of his trumpets to his lips for his solo. The mouthpiece instantly changed to chocolate. Then almost as fast, the chocolate spread along the instrument, changing all the flashing gold and dull brown. The first note came out fairly true, ta, but the chocolate trumpets cannot withstand much pressure. The hole in the mouthpiece softened and clogged up, and the valve stuck as John desperately tried to finish his part. Mrs. Quaver's eyes almost popped out of her head as she listened to him play ta, ta, tu, ta, tur, ti, ti. It sounded as though John were trying to play a soap-filled bubble pipe. Terribly flustered, he put down his trumpet. Mrs. Quaver was speechless. The orchestra was rocked by the uproarious laughter. The other trumpeter leaned over toward John's chair and picked up the trumpet. "It's chocolate trumpet," he shouted derisively. No wonder it sounded like that. John Midas was trying to play a chocolate. John didn't want to hear any more. He fled from the stage and out the playground without stopping even to look around. He ran through the stone gateway and homeward. All right, so that's it of chapter 8. All right, so answer the questions, and then I will make another video of the rest of the book. All right, I hope you're enjoying it.